Hi, so my name is Prem Asim Jain, and today in this Node.js tutorial, we are going to learn about full stack development. So, as part of full stack training, this the very important step wherein we analyze the structure, bits and pieces, how backend and front end are connecting, how database is connecting, what are the places where connectivity happens, and how this entire magic works. So, fortunately, this is super simple to understand, and it's pretty much what we have learned before in Node.js. So, this will be the Express Node web application, which will use Angular 1.x and MongoDB. So we will first analyze the structure of any typical mean stack application. So usually what happens is you will have the API part and then whatever your fonts public folders, like this would be your API, which will be backend, and your public folder, which would be your basically presentation layer. And why it is public? Because the Angular strategy is instead of calling each page from server on each request, usually the Angular combines it in a file called as app.js, which is minified, which is very lightweight. So in a single go, it goes and sits on the client so that repetitive requests are not there. Only required data, which will be served by the API portion, that would be given in JSON format to the application, and application runs. So this portion would be exposed publicly, and the API portion will sit on the node server on the server basically. So just imagine you have a Amazon virtual machine. So API folder will sit there, and as soon as the first request come, whatever are the contents of the public folder, they would go and sit on the client, and then from the client, whenever consecutive request will come, API folder will serve. So this was a detail. Now connecting or going deeper, now I'll walk you through that. So we have learnt that there is app.js. So let me close everything. This is just a simple structure. On the root, we have package.json, which would define what are the dependencies for this project basically. So this is typical REST application of Node. So these are this one would be the things used, which is dependency like Express, MongoDB. It is having Mongoose, Angular, and Angular route. So these are the dependency. As soon as you come to this folder, you have to say npm install. So by default from the root, it would read the package.json, it would go through these dependencies, and then it would install it in the node module. If it is not there, if it's there, then it's not a problem, like it will skip basically. So right now it did some analysis, and then it started fetching and installed whatever are the versions. So you have already mentioned the version. So those dependencies would be installed in the node module, which are just the library. Or from Java background, guys can think of these are the jars which would get downloaded from Maven repository. If we think about Maven, and then it would get stored for the project to be used. Now there is API folder. So before going there, let's see, to run the application, we would run node app.js. So first let's analyze what are the contents of app.js. So app.js would be the very first file from which the application would trigger. So in Java, you have 10 files or 50 files, or you have a huge project, but there is a main function from which thing triggers, which we called as the entry gate. So this file is the entry gate of the application. You can name it whatever, but for convention, people give it name as app.js. So you might call it as asim.js or whatever. And once you write node asim.js, application would start going through line by line for this. And whatever we'll go through line by line, what are the instructions? which would bootstrap would start the application, would start connecting application, load it in the RAM of the server, and once it's loaded, it would start working basically whenever the request comes. If there are error, it would show and log it. So very first line we are saying, hey, we require db.js, and this is in the API. So we say from app.js dot is current directory. After that, go to API folder, then go to data, and then go to DB. And inside DB, once we go there, it would give all the credentials for the database, MongoDB, Mongoose, and rest all process. Once we go to this layer, we'll understand more about it. But on high level, first thing is it gets the connectivity details, and it require means import, the function wants this file and some data from this. So that's how it's required. After that, we are requiring other modules. So this one is user written, like we have written this. Now apart from it, the express is the inbuilt, like the library which we are using. It's one of the dependency though. So we have got express, we have initialized it, and then called it as app, because express would be the web application framework which would help us to bootstrap or start this API and going ahead. Then there is path module which we are using. Then there is body parser. So body parser is required whenever someone sends request from client, the user sends request. Body parser makes it really short to parse the body and make sense out of it. There are some methods which will give you directly what are the JSON payload, what are the values, what are the headers, what are the parameters of the request and filters and blah blah, lot of things. So this library eases our job to identify stuff and parse the body. Routes is something in web application. There is a resource, and for each resource there is a route. For example, index would be the home page. Then you would have a route for dashboard. You can have the route for preferences, admin page, and lot many other pages. So routes is the file location or the path for that file or functionality or resource. You can use all these words interchangeably, but just to understand that route is the kind of file path URL which would be used to navigate you to that particular page. So this is jobs. So instead of writing each thing, parsing, writing navigation, we would leverage this library. Now we have the app express app. So we will define the port for the app. If we do not give any host, it's by default local host. Otherwise you can define the host itself. Usually wherever you will run, that would be the host. So it's not required most of the time, unless you are not through IP table, you are trying to bifurcate your port IP addresses basically by proxy or whatever. Now app.use, so we give it a function which is add middleware to console log everything. So whatever comes, each request and response. So this is next kind of filter. So each request will come here and go through here. So this can act as the interceptor. So people from Spring background might understand Java Spring background. There is a concept called as interceptor. So each request is intercepted, and whatever is your concern, may it be login or error handling or whatever security, you can write that piece of code, and it would act as a filter to each request and response and would run. So manually you do not have to write additional code in each file, each method, wherever. So it eases the job. So it would log what kind of request and what path, which means the URL or the route, is being used. So next would be the next step for that. Once it gets the request, and then it would call whatever is the next function. So if we think about the stack, one method calls another, that calls another. So something like that, whatever is the next method in the stack, that would be called by using next. Now set static directory before defining routes. So static directory means your public directory. There are some dynamic contents and some static contents. So static content means your HTML files and your CSS. CSS never changes basically. Your image will not change on the fly on the runtime. What changes from Java background, people can relate that there is runtime. Program will have polymorphism. It would change behavior, whatever. So and static content would always remain same, whatever is there. So we are telling Express that whatever are the static contents that are in the public directory, underscore dir will give the current directory. Inside that there is a public directory. So index.html is the default welcome file. We can say it as a welcome file from where the application first page would be loaded. Now we say use app.use node module static directory. All the node modules would be would come through here. So in public directory we have Angular. So we see Angular app, CSS, images, some jQuery, and by default index.html. This is how the structure is. After we get this, we get appropriate fonts and we map it to slash fonts. So wherever this would be used, we call app.use. So it would automatically redirect to this and then it would grab stuff from there. Now body parser URL encoder enable parsing of the posted forms. And then in the JSON basically it would use pass.json. Then you can use API routes. So by default whatever APIs you would call in that slash API would be your landing or the very first context. So we will learn about routes. Inside the routes file, all the other API URLs are there. URL means if you need user details, user will be called as resource. We are taking the example of a hotel application. So all the routes related to hotel would be mentioned over here. So we can quickly have a look here to the routes. So this would be in the API routes. So this would be your API routes. Inside the routes, so index.js is the default basically, so it would get loaded. So this is one route wherein if you say slash hotels, it would call the controller and controller would query to the MongoDB, get all the hotels and display it for you. Same way, there are different routes. If you want a particular hotel by some ID, or you want the reviews of a particular hotel and stuff like that. So you have defined all the routes and then you have exported the variable module.export as router. So this router would be consumed in the app.js and it would be mapped something like API slash would be the how name like nomenclature, how we would name it and call it. So we'll learn more how to call that. Now the final step is starting up the server. So listen for request. So you are saying listen server. You have the port basically get port which you have defined here. So app.set port. On that particular port, server would start listening. This is the function wherein it would get the server address port and console.log will save on so and so port application magic is happening on this port. So enough of this. Now let's try to run this. So I'll say node app.js and as soon as I start it, it would start going through it. And then first thing is so since it is asynchronous, so you would see this file, this thing was called later, which was related to mongoose connectivity, and magic happens on this port. So this line got executed, application had started basically instantaneously, and meanwhile this import of db file happened, and then wherever the mongoose url. this was the mongoose URL. So it got activated, and then it was called up. So we will learn in a different tutorial or session about the backend portion of connectivity. We will learn about the middleware, and then we'll learn about the UI, all in a separate session. So I hope this session was useful to understand the overall application folder structure. Now we'll deep dive in all the specific layers: the database layer, the business layer, which is middleware, and the presentation layer. So just to summarize, essentially there are a public folder which will have all the Angular code and CSS images, everything inside it. And then we have the API folder which will have all the API which would be used by the Angular application inside this folder. And the API will have the credentials for the database. So wherever we put our data, basically that would be for the connection string, that would be used and called up. So this is how in a super simple way this application is there. Package.json defines the node module or whatever are the dependent libraries which are there, and nodemon is something optional which is not required, but nodemon is used for monitoring the node application. Whenever application fails or something happens, it will keep on monitoring the health, so it's optional. So required part, you will have API folder, you will have node modules, you will have public folder, and then you need a startup file which is app.js, and then a dependency file which is package.json. Readme.md is optional. It describes you how things works or how you can do this, basically running some instructions of running the project. And similar way there could be so many other optional things, but the baseline was just what I said. I hope you have enjoyed. If you have any questions, feel free to mail me at premasim.webmaster@gmail.com. Thanks for watching.